The sword went through my stomach before I even realized what was happening. Not a monster's claw, not a dungeon trap. A sword, a human sword, held by a human hand, held by someone I had trusted for 3 years. I looked down. The blade was buried to the hilt in my abdomen, just below the ribs on the left side. Blood was already soaking through my leather armor, warm and wet and spreading fast. The pain had not arrived yet. That would come in a few seconds when the shock wore off. I looked up. Kang Hyun-soo was standing in front of me. My party leader. The man I had followed into over 200 dungeons. The man I had healed through boss fights, death traps and ambushes. The man I had saved from a cave troll on floor 14 by burning through every last drop of my mana to keep his heart beating. He was smiling. Not a cruel smile. Worse. An apologetic one. The kind of smile someone gives when they are doing something terrible, but have already decided it is necessary. "Sorry, Jiwon," he said. He twisted the blade. The pain arrived. I screamed. My knees buckled. I fell backward and hit the stone floor of the dungeon corridor. My staff clattered out of my hand and rolled into the darkness. Behind Hyun-soo, the rest of the party stood watching. 4 people I had spent 3 years fighting beside. 4 people I thought were my friends. Park Soo-jin, our mage, level 34. She was looking away. She could not meet my eyes. Her hands were clenched at her sides, and her jaw was tight. She did not want this. But she was not stopping it either. Lee Dong-wook, our tank, level 36. He was leaning against the wall with his arms crossed. His expression was blank, professional. He had done this kind of thing before. I just never thought he would do it to me. Yu Cherin, our assassin, level 33. She was cleaning her nails with a dagger. Bored, like this was a minor inconvenience in her day. Of the 4 of them, she was the one I understood the least. Cold, efficient, and incapable of attachment. I should have seen this coming from her at least. And finally, standing behind all of them, half hidden in the shadows, was our party's sponsor. A man I had only met twice. A man who wore suits instead of armor, and smiled like every word was a business transaction. Guildmaster Seo Min-hyuk, head of the Crimson Edge Guild, the 2nd largest hunter guild in Korea. Hyun-soo pulled the sword out. The sound was wet and horrible. I pressed both hands against the wound. Blood pulsed between my fingers. "Why?" I managed. My voice was a whisper. The pain was eating my ability to think. Hyun-soo crouched beside me. He put his hand on my shoulder, the same hand that had just stabbed me. The gesture was so obscene that I wanted to vomit. "The dungeon core on floor 50, he said. "Guildmaster Seo needs it, intact, undamaged." He looked at me with something that might have been genuine regret. "A healer cannot survive alone on floor 47. You know that. Without us, you will die within the hour. The monsters here are level 40 minimum. Your combat stats are barely level 20 equivalent." He stood up. "You were a good healer, Jiwon. The best I have ever worked with. But a healer is replaceable. A dungeon core is not." He turned and walked deeper into the corridor. The others followed. Soo-jin glanced back once. Her eyes were wet. Then she looked away and kept walking. Guildmaster Seo paused beside me. He adjusted his cuffs. I could smell his cologne. Expensive. Wrong for a dungeon. "Nothing personal," he said pleasantly. "Your party's contract specified that all dungeon resources belong to Crimson Edge. The core is a resource. You are—" He looked at me bleeding on the floor. "An expense." He followed the others into the dark. Their footsteps faded. Then silence. I was alone. On floor 47 of the Abyss dungeon. The deepest, most dangerous dungeon in Korea. Bleeding from a stomach wound. No weapon. No party. No healing potions. Because Hyun-soo had taken my supply pack before stabbing me. My health bar in my vision was dropping steadily. 68%, 61%, 54%. I was going to die. Again. For real this time. Not in a blaze of glory fighting a boss monster. Not saving a teammate. Bleeding out on a cold stone floor because the people I trusted decided I was worth less than a rock. I lay there, watching my health bar drop, watching the ceiling of the dungeon, which was carved from dark stone and faintly luminescent with blue crystal veins. It was almost beautiful. A strange thing to notice when you are dying. 47%, 39%, 31%. I thought about my life. 3 years as a hunter. 3 years in dungeons, fighting monsters, leveling up, healing people who apparently did not care whether I lived or died. I had chosen the healer class because I wanted to help people, because I believed that keeping others alive was the most important role in any party. Turns out, the most important role was also the most expendable. 24%, 18%. My vision was going dark at the edges. The blue crystal veins in the ceiling were pulsing, slowly, like a heartbeat. Wait, they were pulsing. I focused. The crystals were not just decorative, they were connected. A network of blue veins running through the ceiling, the walls, the floor, all of them pulsing at the same rhythm, like blood vessels in a living body. And they were pulsing faster now, as if something had noticed me. 12%. The floor beneath me began to vibrate, a low hum that I felt in my bones more than heard. The crystal veins brightened. The blue light intensified until the entire corridor was glowing. Then a voice spoke, not out loud, inside my head, deep, ancient and vast, like hearing a mountain think, "You are dying." I did not have the energy to be surprised. Yes, I thought, I am dying. Your companions left you. Yes, they seek my core, the heart of this dungeon. They wish to extract it and sell it to the surface guilds. I did not know what to say. I was at 8% health. Coherent thought was becoming difficult. The voice continued. I have existed for 4,000 years. In that time, 2,847 parties have entered my halls. They come for treasure, for power, for glory. Some die on the first floor. Some reach the deepest chambers. All of them take. None of them give. The pulsing crystals were directly above me now. A cluster of them, bright and hot, gathering into a single point of light. You gave. Every battle, every flaw. You healed your companions. You kept them alive. You sacrificed your own advancement to ensure their survival. You chose to be the one who keeps others standing, even though it meant you would always be the weakest. The point of light descended. It floated down from the ceiling and hovered above my chest. It was warm. The warmth spread through my body. The pain in my stomach began to fade. 5% health, 4%. The voice spoke one final time. I have never bonded with a human. In 4,000 years, none has been worthy. But you, healer, are the first person to enter my dungeon who gave more than they took. Ding! Dungeon core resonance detected. The Abyss Dungeon core is attempting to bond with host. Accept bond. Warning. This bond is permanent and irreversible. Host will become the dungeon master of the Abyss Dungeon. All dungeon monsters, traps, and resources will fall under host's control. 3%. My vision was almost completely dark. Except, I thought, the light entered my chest. The pain disappeared. Not gradually. Instantly. Like flipping a switch. One moment I was dying on a cold floor. The next, I was lying in a pool of blue light, warm and alive, and completely, utterly changed. My health bar filled, not to 100%, to a number I had never seen before. Health, healer percent. Base HP increased from 4,200 to 42,000. My stats updated. Not the stats I was used to seeing. Name, Han Ji-won. Level, 28. Class, Healer. Evolved. Dungeon Master. HP, 42,000. 10x multiplier from Dungeon Core Bond. MP 38,000. 8x multiplier from Dungeon Core Bond. Strength, 24,124. Dungeon Augmented. Agility, 31,21,31. Dungeon Augmented. Intelligence, 89,20,89. Dungeon Augmented. Wisdom, 94,294. Dungeon Augmented. Every stat had been multiplied, not by a little, by enormous amounts. My intelligence and wisdom, already high from being a healer, were now nearly 300. That was higher than any recorded hunter in Korea, higher than any recorded hunter in the world. But the stats were not the real change. The real change was what I could feel. The dungeon. I could feel the entire dungeon. All 50 floors. Every corridor, every chamber, every trap, every treasure chest, every monster. I felt them the way you feel your own fingers. They were part of me now. Extensions of my body. And the monsters. I could feel every single one. Floor 1. 200 goblins. Weak, simple, numerous. Floor 5. 50 stone golems. Slow, tough, mindless. Floor 1030 shadow wolves. Fast, pack hunters, cunning. Floor 1520 iron knights. Armored, disciplined, strong. Floor 20, 12 flame drakes. Flying, fire-breathing, territorial. Floor 25, 8 frostworms. Massive ice attacks. Intelligent. Floor 30, 5 elder treants. Ancient, nature magic, regenerating. Floor 35, 3 voidwalkers. Dimensional magic, teleportation. Lethal. Floor 40, 2 abyssal sentinels. Near boss level strength. Darkness domain. Floor 45, 1 dungeon guardian. Boss level. Massive. The last line of defense before the core chamber. And on floor 47, where I was lying right now, there were 6 lesser shadow beasts roaming the corridors within 200 meters of my position. I could feel them, their hunger, their territoriality, their simple, predatory instincts. And underneath all of that, a thread connecting them to me. A thread I could pull. I pulled it. The shadow beasts stopped moving. All 6 of them, simultaneously, froze mid-step. Then they turned, toward me, not aggressively, obediently. They padded through the corridors on silent paws and gathered around me in a semicircle. 6 shadow beasts, level 42 each, creatures that could tear a level 30 warrior apart in seconds, sitting around me like obedient dogs waiting for instructions. I sat up. The wound in my stomach was gone. Not healed. Gone. The skin was smooth and unmarked, as if Hyunsu's sword had never touched me. I looked at the shadow beasts. They looked back with glowing red eyes, patient, waiting. I thought about Hyunsu, about Sujin, Dongwook, Cherin, about Guildmaster So and his cologne, about the way Hyunsu had smiled when he stabbed me, about the way Dongwook had leaned against the wall like it was nothing, about the way Cherin had cleaned her nails. They were heading to floor 50, to take the dungeon core, my dungeon core. They did not know it was already taken. They did not know that the worthless healer they had left to die was now the master of every monster between them and their goal. I stood up. The shadow beasts rose with me. Blue light pulsed through the corridor walls, brighter now, responding to my presence. The dungeon was awake, and it was angry. No, I was angry. Find them, I said. The shadow beasts vanished into the darkness. I did not chase after my former party immediately. I wanted to. Every fiber of my being wanted to sprint down those corridors and unleash every monster on every floor on the 5 people who had betrayed me. I wanted to watch Hyunsu's face when a frost worm landed on his head. I wanted to see Dongwook try to tank an abyssal sentinel. I wanted Cherin to feel the panic of being hunted by something faster than she was. But I did not, because the old Jiwon, the healer Jiwon, the one who thought before acting and planned before moving, was still in charge. The anger was new, the patience was not. Instead, I sat on the floor of Corridor 47 and explored my new abilities. Ding! Dungeon Master Interface unlocked. The following functions are now available. Monster Command. Direct control of all dungeon monsters. Issue orders. Change patrol patterns. Assign targets. Monsters will obey without hesitation. Dungeon Manipulation. Reshape dungeon architecture within existing boundaries. Create new corridors. Seal existing ones. Add or remove traps. Cost. Mana proportional to scale of change. Dungeon Sense. Full awareness of all entities within the dungeon. Location, status, health, and intentions of every living being within the dungeon boundaries. Range. Unlimited within dungeon. Monster Evolution. Invest dungeon mana into specific monsters to evolve them into stronger forms. Evolution paths vary by monster type. Cost. Significant mana per evolution. Core Protection. The dungeon core is now bonded with host. If the core is damaged or removed, host dies. If host dies, the core shatters. Mutual Dependence. Loot Generation. Control what loot drops from defeated monsters. Can create custom loot tables. Can generate materials, weapons, armor, and consumables from dungeon mana. That last one caught my attention. I could control loot drops. In the hunter world, loot was everything. Weapons, armor, crafting materials, potions, all of it came from dungeons. The guilds fought over dungeon access because dungeon loot was the foundation of the entire hunter economy, and I controlled all of it. Every drop, every chest, every reward in a 50-floor dungeon was now mine to distribute or withhold. I checked the dungeon sense. 5 blue dots, human, moving through floor 48. My former party. They were fighting something. I zoomed in mentally. They were engaged with a pair of floor 48 guardians. Lesser versions of the floor 45 dungeon guardian. Strong, but not insurmountable for a level 35 party. Hyunsu was in the front, sword blazing with his combat skills. Dongwook was tanking hits on his massive shield. Sujin was casting fire spells from the backline. Chaerin was flickering in and out of stealth, landing critical hits. And Guildmaster Seo was standing well behind the fight, watching with his hands in his pockets. He was not a fighter. He was a businessman. His contribution to this dungeon run was money and connections. The fighting was outsourced to people like Hyunsu, but someone was missing from the backline. Someone who should have been there, keeping health bars full, removing debuffs, and making sure nobody died. A healer. They did not have a healer anymore. I watched Hyunsu take a hit from the Guardian's tail that dropped his health by 30%. In the past, I would have had him back to full within 2 seconds. Now, he had to chug a healing potion. Those potions were expensive, slow-acting, and they had a limited supply. Dongwook's shield arm was weakening. Without a healer refreshing his stamina buff, his defense was degrading with every hit. His blocks were getting slower. His footwork was getting sloppy. Sujin was burning through mana faster than usual because she was trying to end the fight quickly. Without a healer to sustain a longer engagement, speed was their only option. But speed cost mana, and mana potions were even more limited than health potions. They won the fight. Barely. Hyunsu was at 40% health. Dongwook was at 55%. Sujin was nearly out of mana. Even Chaerin had taken a glancing blow that left her limping. They used 3 health potions and 2 mana potions. I could see their inventory through dungeon sense. They had 7 health potions left, 3 mana potions. For 2 more floors, including the floor 50 boss chamber. They were going to run out. I could have stopped them right there, sealed the corridor, sent the floor 48 monsters at them in waves, collapsed the ceiling. 100 different ways to end them with a thought. But that was too easy. And too quick. They needed to understand what they had done, not just feel pain. Understand. I opened the dungeon manipulation interface and started making changes. Small ones, subtle ones. On floor 48, I added a fork in the corridor that had not been there before. The left path led to floor 49. The right path led to a dead end that would take them 30 minutes to realize was wrong. The right path also had slightly thinner walls that would let the sound of a distant monster echo through, making it sound like the correct path had activity. On floor 49, I weakened one of the bridge supports over the chasm. Not enough to collapse under their weight. Enough to make it sway. Enough to make them slow down and question every step. Enough to make them remember that they were in a dungeon without a healer, and every moment of doubt was a moment of vulnerability. And on floor 50, at the entrance to the core chamber, I placed a new monster. I evolved one of my shadow beasts from level 42 to level 50. A shadow lord, twice the size, 3 times the speed, and with an ability that healers would have been able to counter easily. Mana drain on contact. Every hit the shadow lord landed would drain the target's mana pool by 10%. Without a healer to replenish mana, one fight with the shadow lord would leave Sujin completely drained. And without Sujin's magic, the party had no range damage, no crowd control, no elemental advantage. Without a healer, they were walking into a trap they did not even know existed. I leaned against the corridor wall and closed my eyes. I could feel the dungeon around me, alive and responsive, waiting for my commands. I could feel every monster on every floor, from the lowest goblin to the guardian on floor 45. I was not a healer anymore. I was the dungeon. And the dungeon had a very long memory. The party found the fake corridor on floor 48 within 20 minutes. I watched through dungeon sense as Hyunsu led them down the right path, the dead end I had created. He moved with the confidence of a man who had cleared this dungeon dozens of times before, never questioning that the terrain itself might have changed. 15 minutes into the dead end, Chaerin spoke up. "This does not feel right," she said. "We should have hit the floor 49 stairwell by now." Hyunsu checked his mental map. "I have run this dungeon 11 times. The stairwell is always down this path. Then why does it dead end?" Dongwook asked, already turning back. They retraced their steps. 20 more minutes wasted. Sujin checked her mana potion count obsessively. 2 left. The wrong turn had cost them time, and time in a dungeon was never free. Monsters respawned. Patrol patterns shifted. When they finally found the correct path and reached the floor 49 stairwell, 40 minutes had been wasted. 40 minutes of accumulated tension, dwindling resources, and the slow creeping realization that something about this dungeon run felt wrong. I could feel their frustration through the ambient magic of the dungeon. Hyunsu's irritation, Dongwook's growing unease, Chaerin's sharpening paranoia, and Sujin's guilt, compounding with every wasted resource. She thought about me. I could feel it somehow, a resonance in the dungeon's magic that let me sense not just location and health, but emotional state. She was wondering if I was already dead, wondering if there had been another way. Good, I thought. Keep wondering. The bridge on floor 49 was where things got interesting. The chasm below dropped at least 200 meters into darkness. I had weakened one support beam, just enough to introduce a slight sway with each step. Dongwook crossed first, testing the path. He felt the sway immediately. "It is fine," he called back. "Just old. Move slow." They crossed one at a time. It took nearly 10 minutes to get everyone across a bridge that should have taken 30 seconds. Guildmaster Seo, walking last, complained about the delay costing money. Nobody responded. On the other side, Hyunsu drank half a healing potion. His health was still at 60% from the earlier Guardian fight. Without a healer, potions were being used as maintenance rather than emergency measures. Their remaining inventory, 5 health potions, 2 mana potions, 1 emergency teleport scroll. One way, only usable once, saving exactly 1 person. I wondered which one of them would use it if things got desperate enough. Floor 50. The core chamber approach. This was where I had placed the Shadow Lord. Level 50. Evolved, twice the size of a normal shadow beast, with mana drain on contact. The party entered the final corridor. At the end stood a massive black stone door, marking the entrance to the chamber where the dungeon core, my core, used to wait. It was in me now. What waited in that chamber was an empty pedestal. The Shadow Lord emerged from the shadows, exactly as I commanded. 3 meters tall, black as void, red eyes burning like dying stars. Hyunsu drew his sword. "What level is that thing?" "I do not have a reading," Sujin said, her detection spell returning garbled information. "That is not possible." The fight began. Hyunsu's lightning-enchanted blade was caught bare-handed by the Shadow Lord, something I had never seen anyone survive in 3 years of fighting beside him. The creature's counter sent him flying into the wall, health dropping 25%, mana draining 10% on contact. Dongwook covered the retreat, his shield ringing under claws like grinding stone, his stamina draining faster than normal without my sustain. Sujin's fire spells landed, but the creature's regeneration kept pace, burning her mana for diminishing returns. Chaerin's stealth assassination was caught mid-strike, her side raked open, stealth broken. 4 minutes. When the Shadow Lord retreated, exactly as instructed once their resources hit critical, they were wrecked. Hyunsu, 35% health, 40% mana. Dongwook, 45% health, exhausted. Sujin, 20% mana, nearly spellless. Chairin, 50% health, bleeding. Health potions remaining, 2. Mana potions, 0. "What was that thing?" Dongwook said, his confidence gone. "I do not know," Hyunsu replied. "But if there's another one in the chamber, we cannot fight it. Not like this." Guildmaster Seo, who had not lifted a finger during the fight, stepped forward. "We are not turning back. The core is worth more than your combined lifetime earnings. Push forward." Sujin looked at him with something approaching hatred. "We have no mana potions. If we push forward, and something worse is waiting, we die." "Then die knowing you tried," Seo said coldly. "Or refuse, and I ensure no guild in this country ever hires any of you again." Hyunsu looked at his depleted team, then at the corridor ahead. "We rest here, 30 minutes. Then we go in together, or not at all." They sat down. Hyunsu took watch. Chairin kept her daggers in hand. Dongwook's eyes never fully closed. Sujin stared at the floor, distant. This was the moment. I decided. I materialized in the corridor, not as a monster, as myself. Han Jiwon, in healer's robes now shimmering with faint blue light, matching the crystal veins. My eyes glowed the same color as the dungeon's magic. Hyunsu was on his feet instantly, sword drawn. "Jiwon? That is not possible. You should be dead." Sujin's face went through shock, confusion, then dawning horror. "You are not human anymore," she whispered. I smiled without warmth. "I am something better." Guildmaster Seo stepped forward with businesslike calculation rather than fear. "You survived. Interesting. And you have changed. What happened to you down here?" "The dungeon happened," I said. My voice was layered. as if the dungeon spoke alongside me. Ding! Dungeon Master presence revealed. All monsters within 500 meters placed on high alert. I felt them respond. Every monster on floor 50, and several from floor 49, attention shifting toward this corridor, waiting for my command. Hyunsu lowered his sword slightly. Jiwon, what is going on? Talk to us. You left me to die, I said. You put a sword through my stomach and told me I was replaceable. His jaw tightened. Guild orders. I did not have a choice. Everyone has a choice, I said. You chose the guild over 3 years of partnership. Over every time I burned my mana dry to keep your heart beating. Sujin sobbed. I am sorry. I did not want to leave you. I did not have the strength to stop them. You had a fire spell that could have incinerated Hyunsu's blade before it touched me, I said. You chose not to use it. She flinched like I had struck her. I turned to Seo. You never even held a weapon in this dungeon. You sent 4 people to kill a 5th, so you could profit from an artifact you do not understand. You directed my execution like a business meeting. Seo's expression stayed carefully neutral, calculation behind his eyes. Whatever you have become, he said slowly, the dungeon core has bonded with you. Unprecedented, valuable beyond measure. Perhaps we can renegotiate. Crimson Edge would be very interested in partnership with whatever you are now. The audacity was almost impressive. He had ordered my murder 6 hours ago and was now pitching a business deal. Here is what happens now, I said, my voice carrying through the corridor with an authority that made all 5 of them go still. You leave this dungeon, all of you, and you tell every guild in Korea that the Abyss Dungeon has a new master, one who does not tolerate betrayal. Hyunsu's grip tightened. And if we refuse, if we try to fight, I smiled again. This dungeon has 50 floors, 200 goblins, 50 stone golems, 30 shadow wolves, 20 iron knights, 12 flame drakes, 8 frost worms, 5 elder treants, 3 void walkers, 2 abyssal sentinels, 1 dungeon guardian. All of them answer to me now. I do not need to fight you, I continued. I just need to walk away and let the dungeon do what dungeons do. You have 2 health potions, no mana potions, 1 teleport scroll that saves exactly 1 person, and you are standing in the deepest, most dangerous section of a 50-floor dungeon that is now actively hostile to your presence. Chaerin's eyes went to the teleport scroll pouch on her belt, calculating, wondering if she could grab it first. Sujin was crying openly now. Jiwon, please. I know what we did was unforgivable, but please, do not do this. We have families, people who need us. For a moment, the old Jiwon, the healer who could not bear to see anyone suffer, stirred somewhere beneath the dungeon's power. Then I remembered the sword in my stomach, the apologetic smile as Hyunsu twisted the blade, Chairin cleaning her nails while I bled out, Dongwook simply watching. I did not answer her plea. I turned to Hyunsu instead. You have 30 minutes to decide. Fight your way out through 50 floors of monsters that obey my every command, or leave the scroll for the person who deserves to survive most, and let the rest of you face what you created. I began to fade, dissolving back into the dungeon's ambient magic. Choose wisely, I said. This dungeon remembers everything, and so do I. I watched them through dungeon sense from every angle at once. That was one of the strange new abilities of being bonded to the core. I did not just see through one perspective. I saw through the crystal veins embedded in every wall, every floor, every ceiling. I saw Hyunsu's clenched jaw, and Sujin's trembling hands, and Chairin's calculating eyes, and Dongwook's exhausted posture, all simultaneously, from 100 different angles. For the first 10 minutes after I faded from the corridor, nobody spoke. Guildmaster Seo broke the silence first. This changes the value proposition significantly, he said, already pulling out a small notebook and pen from his jacket, as if he was documenting a business meeting rather than standing in a death trap. A bonded dungeon master is worth infinitely more than a raw core. We need to find a way to bring him to the surface. Under contract. Under our banner. Chairin looked at him like he had lost his mind. He just told us 50 floors of monsters answer to him, and you are thinking about contracts. I am thinking about survival, Seo snapped. If we cannot fight our way out, our only option is negotiation, and negotiation requires understanding what he wants. Dongwook spoke for the first time in several minutes. He wants revenge, he said quietly. That is what he wants. Nothing you say is going to change that. His voice was hollow, the voice of a man who had run out of easy answers. I watched him kill a level 40 party's worth of monsters with a wave of his hand. There is no contract that fixes what we did. Sujin was still crying, though quieter now, the tears simply running without the sobbing. She was staring at her hands. I keep thinking about all the times he healed me without being asked, she said. All the times he burned through his mana pool to keep the rest of us alive, and never once asked for extra loot share or special treatment. He just did it because that was who he was. She looked up. And we killed that person. Whatever is out there now, wearing his face, we are the ones who made it. Hyunsu had been quiet, staring at the corridor where I had disappeared. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight I had not heard from him before. Not fear exactly. Something closer to shame, finally catching up with 3 years of easy choices. I told myself it was just business, he said. Guild orders. A contract clause. I told myself G1 would understand, that any hunter would understand the realities of guild politics. He shook his head slowly, but I looked him in the eyes when I did it. I felt the blade go in, and I still did it anyway. Ding! Emotional resonance detected. Kang Hyun-soo experiencing genuine remorse. Resonance strength. Moderate. Note: remorse does not equal redemption. Host discretion advised. I felt it too. Through the dungeon's strange new senses, I could feel the shift in Hyun-soo's emotional state. The way guilt was finally breaking through the professional detachment he had used to justify stabbing me. It was almost enough to make me reconsider. Almost. The 30 minutes passed. I materialized again, this time at the entrance to the core chamber itself, the massive black stone doors standing open behind me, revealing the empty pedestal where my core used to rest. Have you decided? I asked. Hyun-soo stepped forward, separating himself slightly from the others. We are not leaving without at least trying to understand what happened here, he said. Not for the core. Seo can have whatever explanation he wants for his guild masters. I want to understand what we did to you. And I want to know if there is any way to make this right. I studied him. There was something different in his stance now. Less the confident party leader who had led 200 dungeon runs. More a man confronting the actual weight of his choices for the first time. There is no making it right, I said. You cannot unstab someone. You cannot unwatch someone bleed out on a stone floor while you walk away. I know, he said, but I am asking anyway, because doing nothing feels worse than trying and failing. Behind him, Karen scoffed quietly. Touching speech. Doesn't change the fact that we are trapped in a hostile dungeon with 2 health potions and 1 teleport scroll. I turned my attention to her. Of all of them, Cherin had shown the least remorse, the most pragmatic detachment from what had happened. In 3 years, I had never fully understood her. Cold, efficient, capable of violence without hesitation. But there was something else beneath that surface that I had never bothered to examine before, back when I was too busy keeping everyone else alive to wonder why our assassin never talked about her past. I focused my dungeon sense on her specifically, not just her location and status, but deeper. The core bond was still new, still revealing capabilities I had not known I possessed. I could feel echoes of her history, faint impressions left in the magical resonance around her. Grief. Old grief, buried deep, calloused over with years of professional distance. A sibling, younger, dead in a dungeon collapse that a healer could not reach in time because the guild had refused to pay for additional support staff. I understood, suddenly, why Cherin had never formed attachments within the party. Why she treated every mission as transactional. Why she had cleaned her nails while I bled out instead of showing visible distress. It was not that she did not care. It was that she had built an entire identity around not caring, because caring had cost her everything once before. You lost someone, I said quietly. Not an accusation, an observation. Cherin's controlled expression cracked, just slightly, just for a moment. How do you know that? The dungeon remembers things, I said. Echoes, impressions. I am still learning what I can see, but I see enough. She looked away. That has nothing to do with what happened to you, doesn't it? I said. You watched me bleed out and felt nothing, because feeling nothing is the only way you have survived losing your sister. But somewhere in there, some part of you recognized exactly what was happening. A healer dying because the people around them decided profit mattered more than a life. Her jaw tightened. She did not respond, but she also did not deny it. Ding! Hidden emotional trigger identified. You Cherin. Deep-seated trauma response to preventable death. Potential for genuine character shift detected. Guildmaster Seo. growing impatient with what he clearly considered an unproductive emotional detour, stepped forward with his notebook still in hand. "This is all very touching," he said, "though I want to remind everyone that we are on a corporate timeline. Crimson Edge Guild has invested significant resources into this expedition. If Mr. Han is unwilling to negotiate a partnership, perhaps we should discuss compensation for the Corps' absence instead." I looked at him, really looked at him, using every sense the dungeon bond had given me. And what I saw disgusted me more than anything: Hyunsu, Chaerin, or even the cold calculation of the betrayal itself. There was nothing beneath the surface, no hidden grief, no buried trauma, no complicated justification for cruelty. Guildmaster Seo Minhyuk was exactly what he appeared to be, a man who saw every living being, hunter or monster, as a line item on a balance sheet. "You ordered my death," I said, "and you are still trying to negotiate a business deal while standing in the aftermath." "Business does not stop for sentiment," Seo said. "That is how Crimson Edge became the second largest guild in Korea. While other guild masters were busy building personal relationships with their hunters, I was building an organization that could survive any individual's death, including my own." He straightened his jacket. "Your death was supposed to be a footnote. Instead, it became the most significant event in this guild's history. I intend to capitalize on that, one way or another." The dungeon around us seemed to darken slightly, responding to something in my emotional state that I had not consciously directed. "You do not understand what you are dealing with," I said. My voice carried an edge that had not been there before. "Enlighten me," Seo said, with the confidence of a man who had never once faced consequences for his decisions. I raised my hand. Not to attack, to demonstrate. The empty pedestal in the core chamber behind me began to glow, not with the core's original light, which was gone forever, absorbed into my own being. This was something new, something I had not consciously created, but which manifested from the depth of my anger and the dungeon's vast, ancient power. A new construct began to form above the pedestal, not a monster, a memory, given form. It showed, in shimmering blue light, the moment Hyunsu's sword had entered my stomach. The apologetic smile, the twist of the blade, my scream, the party walking away. Sujin turned away, unable to watch. Hyunsu's face went white. Dongwook's hands clenched into fists at his sides. Chaerin watched without flinching, though her eyes were wet. Seo watched with clinical detachment, as if evaluating a business presentation. "This is what happened," I said. "This is what you ordered. And now it exists, permanently, in the memory of this dungeon. Every future party that enters the abyss will see this projection near the core chamber. Every hunter guild in Korea will eventually learn what Crimson Edge did to secure a dungeon core." Seo's composed expression finally cracked. "You cannot do that. That would destroy our guild's reputation." "I know," I said. "That is rather the point." The projection faded, but its impact lingered in the corridor like smoke after a fire. Hyunsu was the first to move. He sheathed his sword, slowly, deliberately, and knelt on the stone floor in front of me, a gesture of complete surrender that I had never seen him offer to anyone in 3 years of partnership. "I cannot undo what I did," he said, "but I am not going to fight you, and I am not going to run. If this dungeon is going to judge me, I will accept that judgment." Behind him, Sujin knelt as well, her earlier tears now flowing freely again, but with less desperation and more genuine grief. "I should have used my fire spell," she said. "I have thought about it every second since it happened. I could have saved you and I chose fear instead. I am not asking you to forgive me. I am just asking you to know that I understand what I did." Dongwook remained standing, but his shield hand was open at his side, no longer gripping the weapon defensively. "I watched you bleed, and I did nothing," he said. "There is no version of events where that becomes acceptable. Whatever happens to me now, I have earned it." Chaerin was the last to move. She sheathed her daggers, but she did not kneel. Instead, she looked at me directly, her expression unreadable, but no longer cold. "I am not going to pretend I feel things I do not feel," she said. "But you are right about my sister, about why I stopped letting myself care, and somewhere in the part of me that still remembers what caring feels like, I know what we did was wrong." She paused. "That is the most honesty I have offered anyone in 5 years. Do with it what you want." Guildmaster Seo remained standing, notebook still clutched in his hand, watching his hired hunters surrender to a power he did not understand and could not negotiate with. "This is absurd," he said. You are all hunters, trained combatants, kneeling before a healer who got lucky with a magical artifact bond. I looked at him. Then I looked at the 4 kneeling, standing, and surrendering hunters who had, despite everything, just shown more genuine humanity in the last 5 minutes than Seo had shown in his entire business-focused existence. Ding! Party surrender detected. Hyunsu, Sujin, Dongwook, Cherin. Genuine remorse confirmed. Seo Minhyuk. No remorse detected. Escalating hostility. Ding! New option available. Judgment. Host may choose individual outcomes for each surrendering party member, based on demonstrated character. I had a choice now. Not just whether to let them live or die, a deeper choice about what kind of dungeon master I was going to become. The dungeon's 4,000 years of history had seen countless intruders come and go, most of them takers, occasionally a few givers. It had chosen me because I gave more than I took. Did that mean mercy, even for people who had nearly killed me? Or did it mean justice, holding each person accountable for exactly what they had done? I looked at Seo Minhyuk, still standing, still calculating, still treating human lives as resources to be managed, and I made my decision. I looked at the 4 kneeling and standing hunters, then at Guildmaster Seo, and I made my decision the way I had always made decisions as a healer, not with anger, with clarity about what would actually help. Hyunsu, I said. He looked up, still kneeling. Yes, you are going to leave this dungeon alive, I said, but not unchanged. I want you to remember exactly what it felt like to have a sword go through your own body, because that is what I am going to give you before you go. His face paled, but he did not flinch or argue. If that is your judgment, I accept it. Ding. Curse applied. Echo wound. Target will experience a phantom sensation identical to the wound they inflicted, recurring at random intervals for 1 year. Non-lethal, purely experiential. Designed to ensure memory does not fade with time. Hyunsu gasped and clutched his stomach as the first echo hit him, a phantom stabbing sensation exactly where he had wounded me, without any actual physical damage. He rode out the wave of pain, breathing hard, then looked up at me with something like acceptance. I deserve that, he said quietly. I turned to Sujin, still crying softly. You had the power to stop this and chose fear instead, I said. But your fear was not malice. It was weakness in a moment that demanded courage. That is a different kind of failure than the others. She looked up at me, hope and dread mixed in her expression. I am not going to curse you, I said. Instead, I am going to give you a burden. Every healer who enters this dungeon from this point forward will sense, faintly, an echo of what happened to me on floor 47. And you, specifically, will be able to sense it more clearly than anyone else. A permanent reminder woven into your magical senses. You will never be able to enter a dungeon again without remembering exactly what silence costs. Sujin nodded slowly, tears still falling, but her shoulders no longer shaking with the same desperate energy. That is fair, she whispered. That is more than fair. Ding, awareness bond applied. Park Sujin will permanently sense dungeon core resonance and moments of significant betrayal within any dungeon she enters. This ability cannot be removed or ignored. I turned to Dongwook. You did nothing, I said. Not because of fear, not because of guilt, but because you had already decided that professional detachment was easier than moral courage. That is perhaps the most dangerous kind of failure, because it requires no strong emotion to sustain, just the absence of caring enough to act. Dongwook's jaw tightened, but he nodded. That is an accurate assessment. Your judgment is this, I said. You will lose your tank specialization for 1 year. Your shield skills, your defensive stat bonuses, all of it will be suppressed. You will have to relearn what it feels like to be vulnerable, to need someone else's protection instead of providing it. Perhaps then you will understand why a healer's role and a healer's life matters as much as a tank's. Ding! Specialization suppression applied. Lee Dongwook's tank class bonuses reduced to base levels for 365 days. Effect cannot be removed through normal means. Dongwook absorbed this in silence, his enormous shield suddenly feeling heavier in his weakened grip. He nodded once, accepting the judgment without argument. Finally, I turned to Cherin. She met my eyes without flinching, though I could see the vulnerability she rarely allowed herself to show. You lost your sister to the same kind of preventable death you almost caused for me, I said. And instead of learning from that grief, you buried it so deep that you nearly repeated the exact failure that destroyed you the first time. I am aware of the irony, she said quietly. I am not going to curse you, I said. And I am not going to burden you with permanent awareness like Sujin. Instead, I am going to give you something harder. A choice. She raised an eyebrow. What choice? You can walk away from this and continue exactly as you have been. Cold, detached, protecting yourself by refusing to care about anyone. Or you can choose to actually process what happened to your sister and what almost happened to me, and try to become someone capable of genuine connection again. I paused. I am not going to force that choice on you, but I want you to know it exists. For a long moment, Cherin said nothing. Then, quietly, almost too quiet to hear, she said, I do not know if I remember how. That is honest, I said. It is a start. Ding. No curse applied to you, Cherin. Personal growth path left to individual discretion. Note, this is exceptionally rare mercy from a dungeon master. Finally, I turned to Guildmaster Seo Minhyuk. He straightened his jacket, still maintaining his composure, despite everything he had just witnessed. And what judgment do you have for me? He asked, his tone somehow still managing to sound like he was negotiating a contract rather than facing consequences. I looked at him for a long moment. Unlike the four hunters who had shown genuine remorse in their own varied ways, Seo showed nothing. No fear disguised as calculation, no guilt buried under professional detachment, just pure, unbothered calculation. Even now, even facing a being who controlled 50 floors of monsters. You ordered my death without ever holding a weapon, I said. You treated a 3-year partnership as a line item to be liquidated when it became inconvenient. And you are still, even now, trying to find an angle to profit from this situation. Seo's expression did not change. I built Crimson Edge from nothing into the second largest guild in Korea by making difficult decisions that other people were too sentimental to make. Your death was a difficult decision. I do not regret difficult decisions. Ding. Zero remorse confirmed. Escalating hostility detected. Threat classification. Ongoing. That confirmed everything I needed to know. Then you will not be leaving this dungeon, I said. For the first time, something flickered across Seo's composed features. Actual fear, finally breaking through the businessman's mask. You cannot simply kill me. Crimson Edge has government contracts, political connections. My disappearance will trigger an investigation. Let them investigate, I said. Let them send their best hunters into the Abyss dungeon looking for their missing guildmaster. They will find exactly what they are looking for. I gestured, and the corridor around Seo began to shift, the ancient architecture rearranging itself according to my will. A section of floor became a spiraling staircase, leading not upward toward the exit, but downward, deeper into the dungeon's substructure, into levels that had never been mapped by any hunter guild because no one had ever survived deep enough to chart them. You are not going to die quickly, I said. That would be too merciful, and mercy is not what you have earned. Instead, you are going to live in my dungeon, indefinitely. You will not be attacked directly. You will not be allowed to leave. You will simply exist here, in a section of the abyss that I will personally maintain, with enough resources to survive, but never enough comfort to feel anything but the weight of what you did. Seo's composure finally shattered completely. This is illegal. This violates every Hunter Guild regulation regarding Dungeon Master conduct. I am not registered with any Hunter Guild, I said calmly. I am not bound by regulations designed for human hunters interacting with human guilds. I am a Dungeon Master now. The rules are different. Ding. Judgment finalized. Seo Minhyuk. Permanent containment within Abyss Dungeon substructure. Resource provision. Minimal survival level. Duration. Indefinite. Contingent on genuine remorse. Unlikely based on psychological profile. The staircase extended itself toward him. 2 shadow beasts emerged from the walls, not attacking, simply positioning themselves to escort him downward whether he complied willingly or not. Wait, Seo said. His voice had lost all its earlier confidence. We can discuss this. There must be terms we can negotiate. There is nothing left to negotiate, I said. You had every opportunity to show even a flicker of genuine remorse, and instead you tried to monetize your own guilt. That tells me everything about who you actually are. The shadow beasts moved forward, gently but insistently guiding him toward the staircase. He resisted for a moment, then seemed to recognize the futility of struggling against creatures that could tear him apart with minimal effort, but were, per my explicit instruction, choosing restraint instead. As he disappeared down the spiraling staircase, his voice echoed back up, no longer businesslike, now genuinely desperate. This is not over. Crimson Edge will send hunters. They will find a way to extract me. They can try, I said, though I doubted he could still hear me. But they will need to get through 50 floors of monsters who answer only to me first. With Seo gone, I turned back to the 4 remaining hunters. Hyunsu was still nursing the phantom pain from his first echo wound. Sujin was wiping her tears, her expression showing something between grief and relief. Dongwook was testing his suddenly weakened grip on his shield. Cherin remained standing, unreadable but present in a way she had not been before. "You can leave now," I said. "The path to the surface is clear. I have recalled the monsters between here and the entrance. You will not be attacked on your way out." Hyunsu stood slowly, still wincing from residual pain. "What happens to the guild?" he asked. "Without Seo, Crimson Edge is going to be in chaos." "That is not my concern," I said. "But I imagine the truth about what happened here will surface eventually. Guilds do not maintain secrets forever, especially when 4 surviving witnesses know exactly what occurred." Sujin looked at the others, then back at me. "Are we going to tell people what happened?" she asked, uncertain whether this was a question for herself or a directive from me. "That is your choice," I said. "I am not going to force any of you to confess publicly, but I suspect carrying this silently will be its own kind of burden, especially for you, given what I have already bound to your magical senses." She nodded slowly, understanding the weight of what I meant. "I think I need to tell people," she said. "Not for punishment, because staying silent about what happened to you feels like a second betrayal." Dongwook nodded in agreement. "My guild contract is void the moment Seo is confirmed missing," he said. "I imagine I will need to explain that disappearance to guild oversight eventually. I do not intend to lie about the circumstances." Cherin remained quiet for a moment longer, then spoke. "I am not going to volunteer information," she said, "but I am also not going to lie if directly asked. That is the most I can commit to right now." I accepted that. It was more honesty than I had expected from any of them an hour ago. As they prepared to leave, walking back toward the corridor that would eventually lead them to the dungeon entrance and the surface world beyond, Hyunsu paused and looked back at me one final time. "Jiwon," he said, "I know I do not deserve to ask this, but is there any version of this where we could eventually earn back your trust? Not today, not this year, but eventually." I considered the question carefully. The old Jiwon, the healer who had spent 3 years prioritizing everyone else's survival above his own, might have offered easy forgiveness, might have said something comforting about time healing all wounds. But I was not entirely that person anymore. The dungeon bond had changed me, sharpened my perspective, given me both the power and the clarity to see people exactly as they were rather than who I wished them to be. "I do not know," I said honestly. "Trust is not something I can promise on a timeline. It would have to be earned, actually earned, through actions over years, not apologies in a dungeon corridor. And even then, I am not certain the person I used to be, the one who trusted you completely, still exists to extend that trust." Hyunsu nodded slowly, accepting the uncertainty. "That is fair," he said. "More fair than I deserve." They left. I watched them through dungeon sense as they made their way back through the floors, their journey now unobstructed, monsters deliberately avoiding their path per my instructions. Cherin walked slightly apart from the others, lost in thoughts she had spent years avoiding. Sujin walked close to Hyunsu, occasionally glancing at him with an expression I could not quite decode, guilt mixed with something that might have been the beginning of genuine partnership rather than mere professional association. Dongwook walked at the rear, testing his weakened shield arm, adjusting to a vulnerability he had not felt in years. They reached the surface 3 hours later. I felt the moment they crossed the dungeon threshold back into daylight, the connection to my sense range fading as they moved beyond the Abyss dungeon's boundaries. And then I was alone again. Not truly alone, of course. I had 50 floors of monsters, ancient magic, and a dungeon that had chosen me specifically because of who I was, rather than who I pretended to be. But something had fundamentally changed. I was no longer simply Han Jiwon, the healer who kept everyone else alive, while quietly hoping someone would notice his own exhaustion. I was something else now, something with power, with judgment, with the ability to reshape reality within these ancient stone walls. The question that remained was what I intended to do with that power moving forward. Whether I would use this dungeon simply as a fortress of solitude, isolated from the world that had betrayed me, or whether I would find some way to use my new authority to actually change how the hunter world operated, to prevent other healers, other support classes, other vulnerable hunters from experiencing what I had experienced on floor 47. I had time to decide. The dungeon was not going anywhere, and neither was I. But somewhere on the surface, news was about to break. A guild master had vanished. 4 hunters had returned from the deepest dungeon in Korea with a story that would reshape everything the hunter world thought they knew about dungeon cores, about dungeon masters, and about the healer everyone had assumed was disposable. The Abyss dungeon had a new master, and the world above was about to find out exactly what that meant. The news broke 3 days later, and it broke like a dam collapsing. I watched it unfold through a method I had not known I possessed until I needed it. The dungeon bond, it turned out, gave me limited awareness of events connected to the Abyss dungeon even beyond its physical boundaries, as long as those events involved people who had been marked by the dungeon's magic in some way. Sujin's permanent awareness bond meant I could sense, faintly, when she spoke about what happened. Hyunsu's echo wound curse meant I felt an echo of his pain whenever it triggered, and through that connection, glimpses of where he was and what he was doing. Sujin gave the first interview to the Korea Hunter Association's Oversight Committee. I felt her nervousness through our bond as she sat across from 3 stern-faced investigators in a sterile conference room, recounting exactly what had happened on floor 47 of the Abyss dungeon. She did not soften the details. She described Hyunsu's sword entering my stomach. She described her own failure to intervene. She described Guildmaster Seo's cold calculation and his final disappearance into the dungeon's depths. The investigators were skeptical at first. Dungeon master bonds were the stuff of ancient legend, documented perhaps a dozen times in recorded hunter history, always in dungeons far older and more dangerous than the Abyss. The idea that a mid-tier healer had bonded with one of Korea's deepest dungeons seemed implausible. Then Hyunsu gave his testimony, separately, in a different room, and his account matched Sujin's in every detail. Neither of them could have coordinated. Then Dongwook confirmed the same events with his own perspective. Even Cherin, true to her word, did not lie when directly questioned, though she offered minimal elaboration beyond confirming the basic facts. The Korea Hunter Association sent a verification team into the Abyss dungeon 2 days later. 5 S-rank hunters, the best Korea had to offer, equipped with every advantage modern hunter technology could provide. I let them in. I did not attack them. I did not obstruct their path. I simply allowed them to descend through the 50 floors, watching every monster stand aside as they passed, watching their growing bewilderment, as encounter after encounter that should have been lethal simply did not happen. Goblins that should have swarmed them parted like water around a stone. Stone golems that should have activated remained dormant. Even the floor 45 dungeon guardian, an ancient and terrifying construct that had killed entire parties in the dungeon's history, simply bowed its massive head as they passed and allowed them through. They reached floor 47, the corridor where I had died and been reborn, and found the memory projection still active, still displaying its endless loop of betrayal for anyone who approached the location. The lead investigator, a woman named Choi Yerin, level 52, one of the highest-ranked hunters in the country, stood in front of the projection and watched Hyunsu's blade enter my body in shimmering blue light. She watched my scream. She watched the party walk away. Then I materialized in front of her. She did not draw a weapon. Her training and experience told her, correctly, that a dungeon master who had spared her entire escort party had no immediate hostile intent. "You are the healer," she said. "Han Ji-won." "I was," I said. "I am something else now." She studied me for a long moment, her expression carefully neutral in the way of someone accustomed to high-stakes diplomatic encounters. "The association sent us to verify the claims and assess the current threat level of this dungeon. Are you willing to answer questions?" "I am," I said, "but I will answer them honestly, and I suspect some of those answers will not be comfortable for your association to hear." The interview, if it could be called that, lasted 6 hours. I answered every question Choi Yerin asked, walking her through the entire sequence of events, from the initial betrayal, through my bond with the core, through the confrontation with my former party, through my judgment of each individual, including Guildmaster Seo's ongoing imprisonment in the dungeon's depths. That is an execution, effectively, she said when I described Seo's fate. Extended, but functionally an execution. It is justice, I said. He ordered my death without remorse, without hesitation, and expressed zero regret even after witnessing the consequences. I did not kill him outright, because I am not interested in becoming a murderer. But I am also not interested in releasing someone who views human lives as line items back into a position where he can order more deaths. Choi Yerin considered this. The association's official position on Dungeon Master authority is complicated, she said. There is precedent, ancient precedent, for Dungeon Masters exercising sovereign authority within their bonded territories. Human hunter law generally does not apply within a Dungeon Master's domain, provided the Dungeon Master does not use their territory to threaten the broader world. I do not intend to threaten anyone who does not threaten me first, I said. But I will not pretend the power dynamic has not changed. This dungeon, and everyone within it, answers to me now. Not to guild contracts, not to corporate interests, not to anyone who views hunters as expendable resources. She was quiet for a long moment, processing the implications. Then she asked the question I suspected was the real reason for her visit, beyond mere verification. What do you want, Han Ji-won? Now that you have this power, what is your actual goal? I thought about the question seriously. In 3 days since gaining the dungeon bond, I had been so focused on the immediate crisis, on judging my betrayers, on processing my own transformation, that I had not fully considered the larger question of purpose. I want the hunter world to change, I said finally. I spent 3 years as a healer, watching support classes get treated as disposable resources by guild leadership who valued combat power over sustainability. I watched healers, tanks, and utility classes get paid less, respected less, and protected less than damage dealers, despite being equally essential to survival. I want that to change. How do you intend to enforce that change? Choi Yerin asked. You control one dungeon, however powerful. You cannot single-handedly restructure the entire hunter economy. Maybe not immediately, I said, but I control access to one of the most resource-rich dungeons in Korea. 50 floors of loot, materials, and combat experience that guilds desperately want access to. I am willing to grant that access, but only under terms that I set. What terms? She asked. I outlined my proposal, one that had been forming in the back of my mind since the confrontation with my former party. Any guild wishing to run the Abyss Dungeon would need to sign a binding contract guaranteeing fair treatment of support classes, equal loot distribution regardless of role, mandatory hazard pay increases for healers and tanks, guaranteed medical coverage and insurance for all party members, not just damage dealers, and a zero-tolerance policy toward exactly the kind of betrayal that had nearly killed me, enforced not by human guild oversight, which had proven inadequate, but by the dungeon itself. Ding! Dungeon Master Policy Proposal drafted. Abyss Accord. If accepted by Korea Hunter Association, all guilds seeking dungeon access must comply with fair treatment protocols. Non-compliance results in immediate dungeon access revocation and potential in-dungeon consequences for violating parties. Choi Yerin studied the proposal with the expression of someone recognizing both its idealism and its practical leverage. This would fundamentally restructure how every major guild operates within your dungeon, she said. Some guild masters will resist fiercely. Crimson Edge's competitors may actually support this, seeing an opportunity to weaken a rival guild's reputation. But others, guilds with similar internal cultures to what led to your betrayal, will see this as an unacceptable interference in their business practices. Then those guilds will not receive access to the Abyss Dungeon, I said simply. I am not interested in accommodating a business model built on treating people as disposable. She was quiet for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, she smiled, a small but genuine expression that transformed her stern features. I have been a hunter for 15 years, she said. I started as a healer, before transitioning to combat classes because the pay differential was too significant to ignore, even though healing was where my talent actually lay. I have watched exactly the kind of exploitation you are describing happen to dozens of colleagues over the years. She paused. I will personally recommend the association endorse your accord. Not because I have to, because I believe it is right. Word of the Abyss Accord spread through Korea's hunter community within a week, and the reaction was exactly as polarized as I had anticipated. Smaller guilds, and guilds with genuinely ethical leadership, embraced the terms immediately. They had always struggled to compete with larger organizations, like Crimson Edge, for access to high-value dungeons, and the Accord's fair treatment requirements aligned naturally with practices they already followed. Within days, dozens of guildmasters submitted formal applications for Abyss Dungeon access, each one accompanied by binding legal commitments to the protocols I had established. Larger guilds, particularly those with corporate structures similar to Crimson Edge's now leaderless organization, resisted vocally. Several guildmasters publicly criticized the accord as an overreach of dungeon master authority, arguing that internal guild management should remain free from external interference regardless of the source. I responded to this resistance in the most direct way available to me. I simply did not grant them access. The Abyss Dungeon, despite its danger, contained resources that no other dungeon in Korea could match. Rare materials for crafting S-rank equipment, unique monster drops that fed directly into the country's magical technology industry, access to Floor 45's Dungeon Guardian, whose defeat, under normal circumstances before my bond, granted rewards significant enough to fund an entire guild's operations for a year. Without access to those resources, guilds that refused the accord's terms found themselves falling behind their more agreeable competitors within a matter of months. The economic pressure did what moral argument alone could not. One by one, resistant guilds began submitting accord applications, their earlier objections quietly abandoned in favor of continued relevance in Korea's competitive hunter market. Crimson Edge itself, now leaderless and facing an internal power struggle over who would assume guild mastery following Seo's mysterious and permanent disappearance, was among the first to formally apply, submitted not by any executive leadership, but by a coalition of the guild's own hunters, many of whom had grown tired of the corporate culture that had led directly to my betrayal. I approved their application, not because I had forgiven the guild's institutional failures, but because I recognized the difference between an organization's leadership and the individual hunters who worked within it, many of whom had never known about, let alone endorsed, Seo's decision to have me killed. 6 weeks after my bond with the Dungeon Corps, I stood in what had become my personal chamber, a space I had reshaped from an unused section of Floor 30 into something resembling a home rather than a mere dungeon corridor. Comfortable furniture, grown or manifested from the dungeon's ambient magic, warm lighting from the crystal veins, adjusted to feel less alien and more welcoming. A view, somehow, of the surface world above, projected through some connection I did not fully understand, but had learned to appreciate. The Abyss Dungeon had transformed under my management. Guild parties moved through its floors regularly now, operating under accord protocols that ensured fair treatment for every class, every role, every hunter who ventured into its depths. Healers were paid equally to damage dealers. Tanks received hazard compensation reflecting the genuine risk of their role. And every single party that entered knew implicitly that betrayal within these walls would face consequences far beyond what human guild law could ever enforce. I had received word, through my extended senses, that Karen had begun therapy, actual professional grief counseling, finally processing the loss of her sister after years of suppression. It was slow progress, but genuine progress, and I felt something like satisfaction whenever I sensed the small shifts in her emotional resonance. Sujin and Hyunsu had formed a new party, smaller, more careful, built on principles that prioritized genuine partnership over transactional convenience. They had not attempted to run the Abyss Dungeon again, understanding, correctly, that some wounds needed distance and time before any possibility of reconciliation could even be considered. Dong-wook's tank suppression continued, 11 months remaining, but reports through the Hunter Network suggested he had taken the lesson seriously, spending his weakened period training alongside support classes, learning firsthand the vulnerability he had once dismissed as beneath his notice as a frontline combatant. And Guildmaster Seo Minhyuk remained exactly where I had placed him, in the dungeon's depths, provided with minimal survival resources, cut off from the business empire he had built on the exploitation of expendable lives. I checked on him periodically, not out of mercy, but out of the responsibility that came with holding someone's fate in my hands. He had shown, in 6 weeks of isolation, no genuine remorse, only escalating desperation and increasingly elaborate schemes for escape that the dungeon's ancient magic effortlessly prevented. I sat in my chamber, considering the strange trajectory my life, my death, and my rebirth had taken. 3 years as an underappreciated healer, one betrayal that should have ended everything, and now an entirely new existence as the guardian and arbiter of one of Korea's most powerful dungeons, wielding influence over an industry that had once treated me as disposable. But even as the Abyss Accord reshaped hunter culture across Korea, I felt something stirring deeper in the dungeon's ancient magic, a presence I had not fully investigated yet, buried in floors below even the core chamber, in sections of the abyss that predated even the core's 4,000-year memory. Something was waking up. Something that had been dormant long before I arrived, long before the dungeon had ever bonded with a healer instead of a warrior, long before hunters had even begun exploring these depths. And whatever it was, I could feel it was not entirely pleased about the changes I had made to its domain. I descended toward the source of the disturbance alone. Not because I lacked allies. In the 6 weeks since my bond with the Abyss Core, I had cultivated relationships beyond mere monster command. The elder treants on floor 30 had proven surprisingly wise conversationalists, their ancient consciousness offering perspectives on the dungeon's history that even my core bond had not fully revealed. The frost worms on floor 25 had developed something like loyalty beyond mere obedience, their intelligence recognizing me as a caretaker rather than simply a controller. But this presence, whatever it was, felt different from anything I had sensed before. Older, deeper, connected to the core in ways that predated my own bond by millennia. I traveled through passages that had not existed in the dungeon's mapped structure, corridors that seemed to manifest specifically for my passage, as if the dungeon itself was guiding me towards something it had been protecting for 4,000 years. The chamber I eventually reached lay far below floor 50, below even the original core chamber where I had confronted my former party. This space had no floor number, existed outside the dungeon's conventional structure entirely. The walls here were not carved stone, but something else, a material that shifted between solid and translucent, depending on how I looked at it, revealing glimpses of what might have been stars, or perhaps something even more vast, contained within. In the center of this impossible chamber floated a second core, similar to the one that had bonded with me, but larger, older, pulsing with a light that seemed to contain every color simultaneously, while somehow also appearing colorless. "You have come," a voice said. Not the same voice that had first spoken to me while I lay dying on floor 47. This was different, vaster, ancient in a way that made my recently acquired 4,000-year-old dungeon feel young by comparison. "I am Han Ji-won," I said, though I suspected this presence already knew exactly who and what I was. "I know what you are," the voice responded, confirming my suspicion. "You are the 7th bond in this dungeon's history, the first in 800 years, the first in the Abyss's entire memory, chosen not for combat prowess, but for the quality of your character." I processed this information carefully. 7 bonds, I said. What happened to the previous 6? The voice was quiet for a long moment, and I felt something like sorrow radiating from the ancient presence. 5 failed, it said finally. Chosen for power rather than worthiness, they could not maintain the connection's demands, corrupted by access to godlike authority within these walls. The dungeon itself was forced to sever those bonds, at great cost to its own stability. "And the 6th?" I asked. "The 6th succeeded," the voice said. "For 300 years, the Abyss thrived under a dungeon master who understood, as you understand, that power exists to protect rather than to dominate. But even the most careful stewardship eventually ends. The 6th master's mortal life reached its natural conclusion 500 years before hunters first began exploring these depths. The dungeon has waited since then, dormant in its deepest purpose, for a worthy successor." I looked at the massive core floating before me, understanding now that this was not simply another monster or obstacle, but the true heart of the Abyss dungeon, the original source from which my own bonded core had been, in some sense, a fragment or extension. "Why show yourself now?" I asked. "Why not reveal this chamber immediately upon my bond?" "Because worthiness must be demonstrated, not merely declared," the voice responded. "I have watched your choices over these 6 weeks. Your judgment of those who betrayed you, balanced between justice and mercy. Your creation of the Abyss Accord, using dungeon authority to protect the vulnerable rather than simply accumulating personal power. Your restraint with Guildmaster Seo, choosing indefinite consequence over convenient execution. Every choice you have made has confirmed what the dungeon sensed in you while you lay dying on floor 47. I felt the weight of that assessment, the understanding that I had been under evaluation this entire time, even while believing I was simply making the best decisions available to me in an impossible situation. "What happens now?" I asked. "What is this chamber, And what do you want from me? This chamber is the true core, the voice explained. Your bond connected you to a fragment, sufficient to grant you Dungeon Master authority over the 50 mapped floors. But the Abyss Dungeon extends far beyond what any hunter has ever charted. 200 additional floors exist below this point, sealed away, containing power and danger that even your current authority cannot fully access. 200 floors, I repeated, trying to process the scale of what this implied. The Abyss Dungeon, already considered Korea's deepest and most dangerous dungeon at 50 floors, actually extended 4 times deeper than anyone had ever imagined. I am offering you deeper bond, the voice continued, full integration with the true core, granting authority over the entire dungeon, all 250 floors, and access to power that exceeds anything currently available to any dungeon master in the world. But this bond, unlike your initial connection, requires absolute commitment. You would become something beyond human, beyond even your current transformed state. A true dungeon master, bound to this place for the remainder of your existence, unable to fully separate from the abyss ever again. The offer hung in the air between us, vast and terrifying, and simultaneously the answer to questions I had not even fully articulated to myself since gaining my initial bond. What would I lose? I asked carefully. What would this deeper bond cost me? Your remaining humanity, the voice said honestly. Not your compassion, not your judgment, not the character that made you worthy of this offer in the first place. Those elements would remain, perhaps even strengthen, but your physical connection to the surface world would diminish significantly. You would become, in the truest sense, a guardian spirit bound to this dungeon, able to interact with the world above only through projected avatars and limited manifestations, never again walking freely under an open sky as a simple human being. I thought about what I had built in 6 weeks. The Abyss Accord, slowly reshaping how Korea's hunter industry treated its support classes. The relationships, however complicated, with my former party members as they worked through their own redemption arcs. The strange, but genuine community I had begun cultivating among the dungeon's intelligent monsters. And I thought about what I had lost, even before this deeper bond. The life I might have had if Hyunsu's sword had never found my stomach. A life with friends who did not calculate my worth against a magical artifact. A life with the simple freedom to walk under open sky without ancient responsibility weighing on every choice. That life was already gone, regardless of whether I accepted this deeper bond. The betrayal on floor 47 had already transformed me into something the old G1 would barely recognize. If I refuse, I asked, what happens to the dungeon, to the fragment bond I currently hold? Your current bond remains stable indefinitely, the voice said. You could continue as you are, dungeon master of the mapped 50 floors, for the remainder of a normal human lifespan. The deeper floors would remain sealed, waiting for a future worthy candidate, just as they waited for you across the centuries since the 6th master's passing. So I have a genuine choice, I said, not just an obligation I am being pressured into accepting. Always a genuine choice, the voice confirmed. The Abyss does not force bonds upon unwilling participants. That path leads only to corruption and failure, as the first 5 attempts demonstrated centuries ago. I stood in that impossible chamber, surrounded by walls that showed glimpses of something like infinite space, facing a decision that would define not just my own existence, but potentially the fate of hunter culture across Korea, and, if the deeper floors contained what I suspected they might, perhaps far beyond Korea's borders as well. I thought about Sujin's tears, about Hyunsu's genuine remorse, about Chaerin finally beginning to process grief she had buried for years, about Dongwook learning humility through forced vulnerability. I thought about the smaller guilds thriving under Accord protections, about healers and tanks finally receiving fair treatment after years of systemic exploitation. I thought about Choi Yerin's genuine belief in justice, about the possibility of expanding these protections beyond just the Abyss Dungeon's influence. And I thought about what 200 additional floors of ancient power might allow me to accomplish, not for personal glory, but for the continued protection of everyone the hunter industry had ever treated as disposable. I accept, I said. The ancient core's light intensified, and I felt the true bond beginning, vast and overwhelming, in a way my initial connection had never approached. Memories flooded through me, not just the Abyss's 4,000-year history, but something deeper, older, connected to the founding of the dungeon system itself, to purposes and powers that predated human hunters entirely. Ding! True core bond initiated. Host authority expanding from 50 mapped floors to full 250-floor abyss dungeon structure. Warning, this bond is permanent and irreversible. Host humanity will be fundamentally altered. Proceeding with integration. Pain unlike anything I had experienced, even the sword wound that had first brought me to this path, tore through my entire being. Not physical pain, but something deeper, my very concept of self expanding to accommodate authority and connection, far beyond what any human consciousness had ever been designed to hold. I screamed, though I was no longer certain the sound existed in any form the surface world could perceive. And through that scream, through that transformation, I felt myself becoming something genuinely new, not human, not quite the ancient consciousness that had guided the abyss for 4,000 years. Something combining both, forged through choice and character, rather than simple power or convenient circumstance. When the transformation stabilized, I opened eyes that now perceived reality in ways my original human sight never could. I saw all 250 floors simultaneously, felt every monster, every trap, every treasure, every corridor, as extensions of my own vastly expanded consciousness. And I understood, finally, what waited in the deepest floors, the true reason the Abyss Dungeon had existed for 4,000 years, why it had waited centuries for a worthy successor to the Sixth Master's legacy. Not simply a dungeon for hunters to farm for loot and experience. A seal. A prison, containing something from before recorded history, something the original core's ancient consciousness had spent 4 millennia containing and weakening, waiting for a master strong enough in character, not just power, to eventually complete the containment permanently, or, if necessary, face whatever waited in that absolute depth directly. I am ready, I thought, projecting the intention through my vastly expanded awareness. Whatever waits below, whatever purpose this dungeon has truly served across 4,000 years of hidden history, I am ready to understand it fully. From the depths, far below even this true core chamber, something ancient and powerful stirred in response to my declaration. Not hostile, not yet, but aware, finally, after millennia of dormant waiting, that a new guardian had risen to continue the work that 6 previous dungeon masters had maintained across 4,000 years of largely unknown history. The Abyss Dungeon had chosen well, and now, the true purpose of my transformation, the true weight of what I had accepted in that impossible chamber, was only beginning to reveal itself. 3 days after the deeper bond, I manifested my primary avatar on the surface for the first time since the transformation, materializing in a small park near the Korea Hunter Association's main headquarters, where Choi Yerin had requested a meeting to discuss ongoing Accord implementation. She noticed the change immediately. "You are different," she said, studying my projected form with the careful assessment of someone who had spent 15 years reading subtle threat indicators. "I bonded with the true core," I said, "the original source, hidden 200 floors below what hunters have ever charted." Her eyes widened slightly, one of the few visible reactions I had witnessed from her carefully controlled demeanor. 200 additional floors, she repeated. That would make the Abyss Dungeon the largest verified dungeon structure in recorded hunter history, surpassing even the Tokyo Deep Rift that Japan has been documenting for the past decade. It would, I confirmed, though I do not intend to open those floors to standard hunter access. What exists down there requires containment, not exploitation. She absorbed this information with visible calculation, understanding the implications for both hunter industry economics and broader magical security concerns. "What are you containing?" she asked directly. "I am still learning the full scope myself," I admitted honestly, "but I believe it predates human civilization's current understanding of dungeons entirely. Something the original core spent 4,000 years weakening and containing, waiting for a master capable of completing that work." Choi Yerin was quiet for a long moment, processing implications that clearly extended far beyond routine hunter industry oversight. "Should the association be concerned?" she asked finally. "Is this containment stable? Does it pose risk to surface populations?" "For now, it remains stable," I said. "But I suspect, in time, additional support may become necessary. Not immediately, perhaps not for years, but I wanted you, specifically, to know what exists beneath the Abyss Dungeon's mapped floors, in case circumstances eventually require broader cooperation between myself and human authorities." She nodded slowly, accepting this information with the gravity it deserved. "I will keep this confidential for now," she said, "but I appreciate the transparency. Most dungeon masters throughout history have not extended that courtesy to human institutions. Most dungeon masters throughout history were not chosen for their commitment to protecting people who could not protect themselves," I said. "I intend to maintain that priority, regardless of how my own nature continues to evolve." She studied me for a moment longer, then extended her hand in a gesture of professional respect. "Whatever you are becoming, Han Ji-won," she said, "I believe the hunter world is fortunate you were the one chosen for this path, rather than someone who might have used this power purely for personal gain." I shook her offered hand, my projected avatar solid enough to complete the simple human gesture, despite my fundamentally transformed nature. "We will see," I said. "This is only the beginning of understanding what the Abyss Dungeon truly represents, and what responsibilities come with being its master." As Choi Yerin walked away, returning to her association duties, I remained in the small park for a moment longer, my avatar experiencing surface sunlight and open sky one final time before returning my full awareness to the dungeon depths that now constituted my true existence. 250 floors, 4,000 years of hidden history, a containment purpose I was still fully uncovering, and somewhere below, ancient power waiting to see whether I would prove worthy of completing a task that 6 previous masters had maintained across millennia. The betrayal on floor 47 had nearly ended my life. Instead, it had become the beginning of something far larger than I could have ever imagined, as a simple, underappreciated healer. Whatever waited in the true depths of the abyss, I intended to face it not with the power-hungry ambition that had corrupted 5 previous bond attempts, but with the same principle that had guided every choice since my transformation began. Protect those who cannot protect themselves, judge fairly, but without cruelty, and never forget what it felt like to be the one left bleeding, alone, because someone else decided your life mattered less than their profit margin. The dungeon was mine now, in full, and I intended to honor that responsibility for as long as my transformed existence allowed. And that is where Han Ji-won's transformation truly begins, because the true core bond has revealed only the surface of what waits in the Abyss Dungeon's deepest floors. An ancient seal, 4,000 years in the making, guards something that predates human civilization itself. And as word spreads that the Abyss now extends 5 times deeper than any hunter guild ever mapped, every major power in the world, from rival nations to ancient magical organizations that have operated in shadow for centuries, will want to know exactly what Han Ji-won is protecting, and whether they can claim it for themselves. If you want to see what happens next, subscribe now, because the true story of the Abyss Dungeon is only just beginning.